I mostly refer to this open close principle as all-in-one principle. Because if you understand this principle properly and if you implement this principle properly, you're already following all the other principles, right? And that is why I wanted to start with O instead of S, right, in this series. Okay, so let's talk about the real world example, right? So there is one platform called mizohub.com, which is built by my friend Sarthak. Basically, it will simplify your deployments, okay? And it's a quite good platform. So if you go to the dashboard and see the providers, right, section. So if I click there and if I click on connect, right, so you can see here connect to new providers, right? So here we have ability to connect with AWS, connect with DigitalOcean, connect with Linode, right? And these providers can be multiple, right? So in future he might add few more, right? So there basically we need to have some kind of code where we can extend these functionalities or extend these behaviors of adding the providers, right? So let's try to implement this with some mock code in our implementation. These principles are completely language agnostic, right? And to demonstrate that, right, and to demonstrate that only, what I'll do is I'll implement this solution or this mock code in PHP. Let's try to do that. So let's create a temp PHP file, right? So let's say there is some controller, right? So let's say controller. I'm just not naming anything, so it may be a provider controller, something like that, right? And then it can be public function. I don't know, these snippets are not working now. Let's say we have create, right? And then here basically I can have AWS provider, or let's call it service provider, no, service provider. And then this will be our provider, and this provider, let's have a provision method, right, in it, right? So basically whenever I need to create this class, AWS service provider, and now it should be fine with it. I need to create this provision method, public function provision, right? Now it should be good. Okay, so now we are envisioning that this controller is responsible for provisioning this providers, and now this create method will actually provision the providers. Instead of type hinting or injecting this AWS service provider, what we can do is I can create one interface, and now we are in PHP land, so I can create interfaces easily. So let's say I have a provider, or let's maybe call it service provider interface, and it will be public. It will have abstract method called public function provision, right, something like that. And then each class will implement this service provider, right? And then if I don't have this method, it will show an error that DigitalOcean service provider doesn't implement this provision method, right? So it needs to implement this method. If I provide here, if I type in here service provider, right, now basically what we can do is whenever this user, I close this mizohub.com, let's go to dashboard providers, right? I can connect, like whenever the user selects, let's say user is selecting DigitalOcean or Linode, right? So then, and then here on the runtime, we can inject any dependency, right? We can inject any class here, AWS service provider, Linode service provider, or digital service provider, any provider, and each provider will have this provision method, right? Because we are having this interface, right? Each service provider implements this service provider interface. So we are 100% sure that it will have this provision method, and it knows how to provision this product, this service. And that way, later, if Sarthak wants to add any new service, right, so basically he can create a new class, and then maybe some other service provider implements provider, something like that. And then on the runtime, he can inject this some other service provider here, and then he doesn't have to change its code. So this is a simple example of how you can identify and leverage this open close principle in your day-to-day life, right? I hope it makes sense to you now. Because these principles are language agnostic, I would highly recommend don't focus on language, focus on understanding the concepts. And that is in a nutshell open close principle. See you in the next one.